Hi, I'm Scott for ediblemusic.com. Every week, I send out quick tips to help you with your mixing. They can include advice about conceptual approaches to your mixes or very practical things that you can do and incorporate into your mixes right away. They're intended to be little snacks that you can use for inspiration and advice. I send them out every week. If you want them yourself, you can go to ediblemusic.com/quicktip. Here are 5 of my faves so far. The first one is to consider splitting your vocals onto separate tracks depending upon the dynamic variation between them. For example, if you have a verse that's sung very quietly compared to a chorus that's sung very loudly, the dynamics between those is vast. So the processing that you might apply when you're working on the vocals on the verse might not fit so well with the vocals when they're on the chorus. So in that instance, you might want to just split them onto different tracks. You can copy the plugins that you had used for processing, move them over to that other track, that duplicated track, and tweak the parameters of, say, for example, the compressor or maybe even the EQ. If a vocalist is performing louder, then maybe some potential room resonance might be occurring in that part of the vocal track as opposed to the verse parts of the vocal track. So I find that you can make it easier on yourself just by splitting those out and processing them differently. This would also apply to different vocal stylings that might be performed throughout the song. Say, for example, if there's a rapped verse and a sung chorus, or a screamed verse and a sung chorus, then you would want to process those separately, I think. What you could also do is to leave things on the same track, but to automate the parameters of the processing plugins as it transitions from a less dynamic part, a verse, into a more dynamic chorus. You could also do this with instruments. Say, for example, a guitar, maybe in one part of the song, it has this huge atmospheric reverb, and then it transitions into less reverb, maybe a softer picked part or something like that. Those might need to be processed differently. So think about potentially just splitting those out and processing them on duplicated tracks. The next one is to remind yourself that your ears are not always trustworthy. If you've been working with power tools all day, or vacuuming, or if you're like me and you got one of those NutriBullets and you've been blending up a storm all day, those are very loud noises, and our ears naturally will apply compression in order to eliminate the harmfulness or reduce the harmfulness of those loud noises. But then by the time you want to start mixing, your ears are already tired. So it's important to take breaks, listen at lower levels, and keep your ears fresh. It's like they always say, a hearful ear is a cheerful ear. No one's ever said that. The next one is called the balance beam. And with the balance beam, those core elements that you will have first brought into your mix, drums or vocals or guitars, depending upon the song and depending upon how you prefer to begin a mix. But usually the first things will be the core elements of the track. And so what you'll want to do, if it's a snare and a kick, for example, you want them to be balanced first so that they're coming out of the monitors with equal energy, and that the transients, the snap of the stick on the snare, the beater on the kick drum, are at equal volume, and so that they will draw a line across the stereo image for you so that you can use that as an anchor to balance the rest of the mix. Maybe the vocals will then be able to be positioned a little bit louder and therefore a little bit in front of the drums. Other secondary elements might be quieter and positioned behind the core elements. But this is a way of imagining and creating for yourself an anchor point so that as you're bringing in the rest of the mix, they'll all be done and positioned in relation to each other around this balance beam. It's a very important practice. It's a very effective practice that you can use to help you figure out how to get things balanced nicely together. Next is a very practical one. I love the way that this delay sounds, so I want you to use it yourself as well. In your left side, have an eighth note. In the right side, have a dotted eighth note. Maybe the feedback is very low. You might want to raise it up depending upon your taste. But what this will do is it will create just a little sort of sonic cloud underneath whatever you're putting it on. It's great on vocals, it's great on guitars, it's great on pretty much anything. But the key thing to think about with this one is that it's not really an effect that your listeners will notice. It's not a very dramatic or stylized effect. All it is it's just putting a little bit of energy underneath the element that you're adding it to. And that will help it to separate away from the other elements in the mix a little bit and will push it forward as well. Try it out. Use it subtly, but try it out. I think you'll like it. And the last one that I want to leave you with is a quick way to get a good tonal balance for your vocals using 3 EQ filters. The first one is a low cut, which you would maybe want to move up to around 70 or 80 if it's a lower register vocal, and maybe up to 100 or 110 if it's a higher register vocal. But you don't really want to cut off any of the vocal. This is more about removing some of the rumble that can happen if you're recording with a large diaphragm microphone for your vocals, which many of us do. So that rumble can be produced by those microphones, and this is just a way of cleaning it out and getting the vocal on its own first and foremost. Next, apply a low shelf, and this will be used just ducking down about 2 or 3 dB as a way to pull down some of the potentially muffled or kind of chesty or boxy or woofy tones that might come up. It's a way of pushing those down so that you can open up the top end and bring in some nice brightness and detail and clarity to the vocals, which you will emphasize with the third filter, which is a high shelf. So find a kind of a pivot point between where the low shelf ends and the high shelf begins, and actually try selecting both of them and shift it around a little bit so that you can find a really nice sweet spot where those lower kind of muffled frequencies are pushed down just a bit, and the higher frequencies, the detail of the vocal performance can come out with a high shelf boost that will also be at around 2 or 3 decibels. That's also a very powerful way of processing your vocals. It's a very quick way of getting a nice sounding vocal, because when you're recording, sometimes vocals can be performed really, really well, but they just don't sound as good as they need to yet. And it can be difficult to make a lot of progress on your work when the vocals aren't themselves yet sounding so good. So use these 3 EQ filters first, get the vocals sounding nice, and then you'll be able to work happily and have a lot more fun with your mixes. If you want more of these, again, every week I send them out. Go to ediblemusic.com/quicktip. See you there.